just practicing that much in order to gain 0.3 of a second in order to be like 5th instead of 10th, I don't really care. Hello everyone, OSW-Sim-Sports here, and thank you so much for 100 subscribers in such a short time. It has just been a month since I started uploading videos on YouTube, and to already have 100 subscribers is awesome to see. Now, sim racing can be quite a lonely endeavor, you know, where you only hot lap by yourself and then you go racing. And when you go racing, you are generally racing by yourself, fighting for yourself for your own result. And this always felt, you know, a little bit lonely and a little bit boring to me, which why this time when I returned to sim racing once again, which I have done many times before in my life, I decided to make a YouTube channel in order to hopefully build a small community of like-minded people that enjoy cars, racing, and, you know, general car nerd stuff as much as I do. But for this video, I wanted to touch on my kind of strange journey throughout sim racing, motorsports in general, and why I keep coming back to sim racing again and again and again. Now, this isn't really your typical I started out with a keyboard or a controller story with Gran Turismo or something, because I kind of had a very strangely privileged position early on in my life when it comes to racing and in particular games. So my dad, when I was still very young, like 6 or 7 years old, he had a game development company called BumbleBeast. And at the time they were developing a game called Big Scale Racing. Now, if you know of RC racing or anything about it, you might know Big Scale Racing is 1 to 5 scale gasoline powered engines. So it's like with lawnmower engines. And with these cars they race competitively at model scale tracks. And there are even European and World Championships for this discipline. Now, because his company was working on this game and they obviously had to do some competitive analysis in order to see what's out there, they had various consoles and a ton of different racing games which they could test and try, and as a result I also had access to those games. Of course, I played games like Gran Turismo, but I also played from a very young age games like Grand Prix Legends, Revolt, Screamer, and tons of others I sadly forgot the name of. Oh yeah, Insane was also a really cool dune buggy game. And so as a young boy I spent tons and tons of hours after school playing all these various racing games, most of the time just by myself and just racing against the computer and just having fun. But with games like Gran Turismo, I very rapidly had a situation where my uncle was asking me to help him beat the licenses on Gran Turismo, for example, because I was, you know, naturally pretty good at the game. But as my dad's company was still doing big scale racing, and my dad in particular was very involved in the modeling of the cars and the tracks, etc. in the game. So from a very young age I pretty much had the privilege of looking behind the curtains of how video games are made and what type of creative decisions are made along the way. And to say that these years and games would have been formative in my development as a sim racer or just a racer in general would legit be an understatement, because even to this day when I fire up games like Gran Turismo or Revolt, it fills me up with so much joy, and yeah, it really brings me back to that nostalgic kid feeling. Now, in the years after Big Scale Racing had left the door and was a released product, with the success of games like rFactor, GP Legends and some others, his company started to pivot more and more towards becoming a driving simulator solutions company versus a games company. This was also still back in the day when LAN parties, if you remember those, were still quite common. And they used to host LAN parties at the company itself, where people would bring their own wheels, bring controllers, keyboards, etc., whatever they could find, in order to race on the Friday afternoon against each other. Now, this was obviously tons of fun, and this is also where I got gifted my first steering wheel, which was the Thrustmaster Grand Prix, if I am correct, which, while it worked, and I was honestly at that time very happy with it, I can see now that it was honestly quite crappy, as it legit didn't have any force feedback. It only had a self-centering spring, and it didn't have any pedals. So the throttle and the brake were like on the flappy like this. So you only had the throttle, which you had to do with your fingers. In the braking, you had to do with your other hand. So it was really weird, but that is in the beginning how I drove on simulators like rFactor and GTR2. Now, obviously, my dad saw I was enjoying racing a lot, and when he started to lose interest a little bit in racing himself, he gifted his old trusty G25 Momo Logitech racing wheel to me, which I could then use to play games like GTR2. Now, as I was still very young at that time, I don't know if this is true, but from what I understand, this was basically one of the best consumer grade wheels you could buy at this time. And as a result, it also came with quite a hefty price tag, even on the second-hand market. And these were the years where I would just start up GTR2 with Catalunya, Circuit de Catalunya de Barcelona, with the Ferrari 550 Maranello, and just do laps and laps and laps and laps. Most of the time just offline, just practicing by myself, but I also did do some online excursions here and there. Obviously, I was still very young, so they weren't really that successful, and I might have crashed some people out of public lobby races, but oh well, that's how it goes. And in terms of like actually learning how to sim race and to be, build it as a skill, I would say these pretty much became my formative years. But obviously, just driving by yourself, practicing without a real goal or a real target, after a while does become boring. And while the modding scene was very active for GTR2 at the time, and while I did try it for a bit, trying different tracks, trying different cars, seeing if you could come up with another class or something, it never became that enjoyable for me. Because honestly, I was more looking to prove, test, and improve myself other than just driving around aimlessly. I slowly lost interest in sim racing, and the G25 wheel started to collect dust. But me and my dad also share a common motorsport passion, which we still enjoy to this day. And so during this time we visited many local, national, and even some international races simply as spectators and to just view and watch the show. And just to give you an example of stuff I have been to over the years, I have been to karting nationals, oval racing, autocross, rallycross in Buxtehude and Valkenswaard. I have also been many times to the what is now called Gamma Racing Day, but in the past it used to be the Risla Racing Day, which is held at the TT Assen. And this is pretty much where my general interest in cars, loud engine noises, smell of rubber and burnt oil stems from. And I was very lucky, as my dad also knew some local people within the motorsport scene around us. So in many occasions we also had some extra access, like pitbox access, talking to drivers, that sort of stuff. Which honestly, as a young kid makes it just that much more cool and just makes you that much more excited to be there that day. And also around the same age, at one of the local rental karting tracks, there was an opportunity to go early on the Sunday morning, and you would pay something like $40 and you would get some coaching for the first hour, and then you would be able to just drive 2 hours for yourself. So it was a really cheap deal to get a lot of drive time. And my dad drove me here a few times in order to partake in these sessions. And I absolutely loved it. And I also improved really quickly, which both surprised me, my dad, and the guy coaching me at that time. And after doing that a few times, sadly, the rental car track that hosted these sessions closed down and these opportunities dried up again. And while I did go out and look for some opportunities to like go karting on a real racing chassis, like actual racing karting. The financial situation just really wasn't there, and yeah, it would have taken a lot of commitment from my family in order to make it happen, and thus that aspiration sort of died down a little bit again. But this was also the moment where I found iRacing online, and of course I still had my trusty old G25, so I pulled it out of the closet. I dusted it off a little bit, and I bought 1 month subscription with, one of these early access introduction offer thingies, because I didn't have any money. And obviously I started out with a Mazda Miata MX-5, and I still vividly remember being thrown on Summit Point Raceway, which to this day basically looks exactly the same. And so obviously I never had really done any competitive online racing before, and so I really didn't know where I would stack up amongst the other drivers on this sim. And so I tried really, really hard, like actual try-harding, practicing before sessions, really doing everything in order to get a nice qualifying time, etc. And within a week, I was able to get my D license. And not just that, after a few days of practicing on Summit Point Raceway, I still remember this, I got within 0.3 of a second of the actual world record. And especially considering that the pedals of the G25 are honestly kind of terrible, especially for the braking. Even now, when I think back of that, I think that is a very impressive achievement. And a race I vividly remember was also on Summit Point Raceway. It was Split 1 and I qualified it on pole, slowly started driving away from the pack, and at the end of the race I had almost 8 or 9 second gap to them. But not only that, I had 0 incident points, 0 off track, 0 issues, just a pristine, perfect race. But sadly, iRacing was honestly way too expensive for me, and in general my family weren't that supportive of doing monthly subscription payments, which now I'm older, I fully understand. So after my introduction offer of 1 month expired again, I just let my membership run out again and I left iRacing again for a few years. But as I mentioned before, my dad's company was now pivoting from a games development company to a bespoke simulation company. And as a result, the company got renamed from BumbleBeast to GPSim. And honestly, looking back at it now, looking at some of the promotional materials they made and some pictures I can still find of it online, it is honestly really, really impressive what they managed to be able to make in such a small building with such a small team, and basically doing almost everything in-house. The engine was in-house, the physics stuff was all in-house, the modeling was in-house. And obviously, while it wasn't really laser scanned and stuff back in the day, I still really remember the quality of the modeling and just the visuals for that time being really good. And just look at that. You have to imagine this was around 2005, 2006, maybe a little bit later, but still very early days, and they already had direct drive force feedback, they had a full motion rig, they had a full GP2 or even later a Formula 1 chassis like as the cockpit where you were sitting in. They even had a custom triple monitor mount with super slim bezels, I remember. And this is sort of where my privilege came in, because honestly, as the son of the boss and as I was an avid sim racer, I very quickly got put into the simulator and just, let us know what you think. And obviously, if you are coming from a G25 on your desk at home with shitty pedals, and you are now put into a direct drive full motion cockpit simulator with a legitimate GP2 car and chassis around you, a completely new world opened to me. Because, the G25 was the only thing that I had experienced other than driving in a kart. And the feeling I was getting through the direct drive system in the motion simulator was honestly so good that it felt one-to-one real with what I experienced in the kart. And obviously, Formula 1 and a rental kart are two completely different things, but when you are in a corner and you induce understeer, the feeling you get in the steering wheel with the forces acting upon it, when the car starts to understeer and you keep turning in more lock in order to overcome it, this sensation of the wheel becoming lighter, all this sort of stuff, all matched perfectly with my expectations. Now, a bit later, as the company didn't really have a dedicated car physics guy, they hired what is most likely for some of you a recognizable name. Because for a few years after he was done with AMS1, Niels Heusinkveld worked for this company as the physics guy. And as I was doing some summer holiday work there during that time, and I had a pretty good and funny relationship with Niels, most of the time when he would do some tweaks to the physics stuff, he would ask me to go help him and test it. And he would be behind the monitoring desk where he could see all the data, and I would be in the car just driving some laps. And while some may know Niels from his physics work in AMS1 and some modding stuff he did over the years, most of you will most likely know him from his racing pedal brand Heusinkveld. And as I was discussing this a few weeks ago with my dad, like how funny it is that the simulation world is this small and that everybody kind of knows each other, he also mentioned that in one of the last GPXLBs that they sold to a customer, one of the very first sets of Niels' pedals were actually in that simulator. And so there is a very realistic chance that I am one of the earliest ever testers of Niels Heusinkveld's pedals. And honestly, just seeing him on the YouTube having his own little nerdy car corner is also what inspired me to create this YouTube channel. But as you can most likely imagine, if you have experienced like a full direct drive setup with motion and with all of the bells and whistles, going home and driving on your desk with an old ass crusty G25 with bad graphics and stuff, it's not really that appealing anymore. And so for quite a few years I was in sort of this sim racing limbo state where every time they were working on a new motion sim, I was more than happy to test and more than happy to drive it for as long as they needed me to. But other than that, I didn't really do any sim racing. But that is not to say that I didn't do any racing at all, because all of the research and the investigative work that went into creating big scale racing also left us with a new hobby, racing RC cars. And for me specifically, we used to run 1/10 scale touring cars with electric motors. We drove these cars at Rail 80 in Groningen, which is our local model racing club. And honestly, this is where I learned most of my knowledge about car dynamics and setup. And with RC racing, at first you might think that it's very simple and it is kids play, but you very quickly realize that basically all of the setup stuff essentially matches one-to-one, Maybe some of the parameters values are a little bit different, but it still matches with full-scale car racing. And so by reading kit manuals over and over again and reading the famous Hoodie setup book over and over and over again, I slowly started to learn more and more about vehicle dynamics, stuff like roll center, center of gravity, pitch, anti-squat, all of this sort of stuff. And as it is very, very easy to test generally within RC racing, you tweak something on the car, it only takes a few seconds, then you put in a battery and you go out and drive for a few minutes. And it's very, very easy to see with your own eyes, like, okay, I made this change to the car, I changed the anti-roll bars to be stiffer in the rear. What does it do to the car? Oh, the car is suddenly more oversteery now. This is pretty much also where I built up all of my foundational understanding of how cars actually work and how to set them up in order to go a bit faster. And this is also where I essentially learn all of the, common pitfalls and dumb assumptions that you make in the beginning. Because when I was still like 12 years old or something, I was doing all of the setup work myself. And at our club, we had a national champion. And I asked him to drive my car for a few laps in order to see, like, what do you think of the setup? Do you think it's good? And he just flat out told me, your car has way too much grip. And I was like, how? Wait, huh? How do you mean? Like, how do you mean I have too much grip? How is it possible that I have too much grip? You always want more, right? But it finally made sense to me when he told me that my driving style was way too stop-start, in the sense that I was coming hard into the corner, then braking hard, going on full steering lock, going through the corner, and then full on the throttle again. And this was losing me tons of time because I both wasn't carrying corner speed and I also didn't let the car roll as it wanted to do naturally. And so with some setup guidance from him, suddenly my car was about 0.2 of a lap faster and it felt way more nicely. And this also taught me that it's sometimes beneficial to have the car slide a little bit in exchange for having more corner speed, as long as the slide is controlled and balanced over the four wheels. Now, in the following years, RF Pro came on the market and slowly started to take up more and more market space, which left the bespoke simulator solutions of my dad's company in a way less competitive position. And as a result, their contract slowly dried out over the years. Sadly, as a result, GPSim slowly folded. It took a few years and it was kind of a painful process, but yeah, they slowly died out. And also sadly, all of the funding for RC racing and other forms of real-life motorsport slowly started to dry out a little bit and became less of a factor in my life. But obviously I was still infected with the motor racing bug, and so I again dusted off my G25, and by now Assetto Corsa was released, which I instantly sunk my money into, and I played that a ton. And for a funny anecdote on how small the community actually developing these racing simulator games is, years later when I was making a vehicle physics simulation for myself, by myself, just for fun, and I was reading up on some information on the internet, I found a very old Google forum thingy in which the man himself, Stefanos Cassillo, was actually asking and answering a bunch of questions related to vehicle physics simulations. But with Assetto Corsa, it's mostly public online lobby racing and there wasn't really a system like LFM like there is now. And so my interest slowly waned again a little bit. And when I moved out a few years later, I didn't even bring my wheel with me. Sadly, it got lost somewhere, and when I got interested in sim racing again, and at that time all I had left really was a PlayStation 2 controller, so I just made do and played quite a lot of Race Room with this PS2 controller. But obviously once you have raced with a wheel, you cannot really go back, so I started to look online on the second-hand market and I found a terrible but still really affordable and within my price range Fanatec Porsche 911 GT wheel, I think. I'll post a picture here. And I used that wheel all the way until the release of Assetto Corsa Competizione. Now, in the beginning, ACC also had exactly the same problems as the original AC had, and in the fact that it only really had online pickup lobbies. It did have these week daily competitive race things, but no one was really taking them serious, and thus it was generally just mostly an offline single player experience in which you would just either hot lap by yourself or race against the AI. But then LFM came around, low fuel motorsport, and for me this changed everything about sim racing, because it was now possible to enjoy Assetto Corsa Competizione like you were playing iRacing, in which you had skill-based matchmaking, licenses, and in quite a lot of cases actually stewarding. This is really when I started try-harding a bit more, like actually wanting to prove myself once again. And luckily around this period I also had a bit of money finally in my life. Still, it wasn't like I was a millionaire or anything, but I found this very nice setup here with this wheel and with the DD1 and with the Club Sport pedals I have here beneath my feet for around 2k, including the rig, which I thought at that time was a really good deal. And honestly, considering I still use it this much and have put around 1000 or maybe 2000 hours on this stuff as of yet, it has been more than worth it to me. And so for quite a long time I really try-harded a ton of LFM, so much so that I really had injuries. I had a lot of back pain, elbow pain, really just trying to grind out the alien level lap times. But I did manage to do so, and I essentially proved to myself that if I really put myself to it and force myself to drive the hours required, I can legit hang with the top guys, and I managed to get a top 100 LFM ranking. And that was also kind of the moment where I knew I had nothing to prove anymore, because I was also realizing that in order to get at this level, you have to do things that make sim racing not fun anymore. So for example, when the tracks change at the start of the week, most of the top guys put in like 6 or 7 hours just at the start of the week, just practicing by themselves in order to find the pace, in order to match the other aliens. And for me, that is honestly just not enjoyable. While I will always try hard, I will never just clown around on the track, especially in a racing session, just practicing that much in order to gain 0.3 of a second in order to be like 5th instead of 10th. I don't really care. And so these days when I drive on games like Le Mans Ultimate, when I look at my driver rating, I know like, yeah, it could most likely be higher if I would try very hard and, be very sweaty for every single race. But that is both not healthy for your own mental, and it is just not fun. Like, it is not the best way to enjoy the hobby, in my opinion. And so what has me returning to sim racing all this time? I think the thing that best describes it is that driving a car, whether it is in real life or in a simulation, driving a car is essentially a giant physics experiment with thousands and thousands of real-time parameters. Where, for example, even with the most advanced tire models like MF Swift and some others, we are only scratching the surface of what is actually happening in the rubber compound. And that is to say, everything we are currently experiencing in simulations, whether it is Le Mans Ultimate, the famous iRacing tire model, or the original Assetto Corsa, it doesn't really matter. It's all an approximation. But the point is, and the thing that makes sim racing so super enjoyable for me, even though we are just experiencing approximations, these approximations feel extremely natural and convincing. Like, I'm talking about force feedback feeling, etc. So much so that if you have a nice direct drive setup like I have right here, quite often during intense racing online, I notice myself slipping into a sort of flow state where you are not really thinking about driving a simulator anymore. You are only thinking about driving and going faster. And so in that moment, the line between motorsports and virtual motorsports essentially becomes so blurred that it in your mind, while you are doing it, it is essentially the same. And on top of that, you can also approach sim racing in whatever way you find most fun. For example, you can go full Verstappen 3.0 hardcore driving mode, but you can also go full car nerds engineer setup mode, in which you just look at Motec data, set up the car, look at rake values, and do all kinds of experiments and stuff to get more out of the car. And so for me personally, sim racing is kind of the perfect blend between technology, physics, passion, and history. And now for the plans for this small channel in the future. I hope to keep doing these race reviews. I hope to keep provide you with interesting tutorials to teach you more about car setup stuff. And I also want to invest a little bit more time about doing historic car content. And so in a way you could say that I just want to share my own autistic little slice of automotive knowledge. And I hope that I can do it in a way that is both friendly and informative while still being a little bit entertaining. And so looking from the bigger picture, essentially I just want to share my passion for everything that has four wheels, whether it is in real life, whether I'm participating in it myself or I'm just there as a visitor. I really love motorsports, sim racing. I've been there, I've done that, and I will most likely keep doing so. And whether you are new here or you are a returning viewer, thank you so much for checking out this channel. If you like what you have seen so far or you enjoy any of my other content, be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Maybe even leave a nice comment if you are feeling good. If you have any interesting stories about your own sim racing journey, please do share them in the comments below. And hopefully I can build a small community in which it doesn't matter whether you are a controller driver or you have like a nice direct drive rig like this. Everyone is open and welcome to join our hobby and to experience in the way that makes the most sense for them. Thanks again for watching this video. I have been OSW-Sim-Sports, and goodbye.